My voice fades sometimes, so if you see my wife took hand signals, it's to up my volume a little bit. Can everyone hear reasonably with that volume? Okay, good. We're going to keep the lights on because, against my better judgment, Lee's wishes to video this performance. But nevertheless, she's the boss, so what she says goes. I would rather it be in darkness than if you guys want to have a quiet snooze, you can have it. Okay, so I've called this talk The Making of David Haig, which of course introduces that nice ambiguity that the English language is so good at, because it means both what I make and what made me. I assure you it will mainly be about what I make, but a little bit about what made me, I suppose, is probably interesting to some of you as well. So I was 70 this year, so I've lived in New Zealand now full-time since 1976. And I've been a furniture maker for 40 years, so there's actually quite a long gap in my 20s when I wasn't a furniture maker doing a range of different things. So I'm really actually quite a late starter, because if you get to 70 and you start it, you've done 40 years, you're only 30 when you begin. That is more or less the case with me. I was born in Malaya, funny enough, and that was my earliest influences. My father was a teacher in the colonial British education service, and rose to become the headmaster of the Malay College in Kuala Lumpur, and which was a sort of quite an exalted position, because the Malay College was called the Eton of the East. Anyway, in 1960, my father was shifted out of his job because Malaya became Malaysia, and the English were asked politely to get lost. But in the meantime, my first 5 years of my life, that's me on my right with my brother on my left, my oldest brother, life was, my sense memory of that time, and I was 5 when we left, was of warmth, bright colours, smiling faces, few clothes, basically a sort of a paradise. And I think I was a happy little chappie. And then we moved back to England. And things changed. Horrible things to me, like school raised its ugly head as a sort of possibility. This was the winter of 62, 63. Some of you who've lived in England might remember that winter. It was the winter of winters. We lived in that little Georgian cottage, and to the left, behind the sort of Christmas tree, is the church. So we lived right next to the church in a little village in the centre of Devon called Bampton. The family grew. There are 4 children and a cat and a dog in that, plus my mother. And I think by that time my youngest brother was probably in her ton as well. So by 1963 there were 5 kids. My father retrained as a lawyer, and life was kind of busy and hectic. And then school came, and it was okay up until the age of 10. Really, I was a day boy. I used to go to the local convent school on the steam train, the Tivy Puffer as it was called. And then at 10, I was sent to boarding school, as people of my background and sort of, I guess, class were. And life became several degrees less joyous. And for the next 11 years, I basically was in boarding school and then university, and I put this image in there as a kind of representative photo of the kind of places that I was educated in. They were all kind of super over-the-top Gothic piles. So Ravenswood School in Devon, which was a bit of a grim old Victorian pile with every architectural but beautifully done. But there was Edwardian, there was Jacobean, there was Elizabethan, every style of architecture you can imagine in this one massive hall. Then I went to Winchester College, which is one of the oldest established schools in England, and again it was full of incredible Gothic and classical buildings and cloisters and things like that. And then from there I got a place to read what's called modern history at Oxford. And modern history meant from the fall of the Roman Empire until 1939, after which it was considered current affairs. This is actually the tower of Magdalen College, where the choristers sang on May Day, from the cloisters looking up at it. But so you can imagine, sort of 21 years of my life were dominated by living in these very, very ancient, very sort of heavy but fascinating places. And I believe that the years of your growing up are really when you are most stamped. So whether you like it or not, and whether I liked it or not, and I didn't like it, I was sort of I had a thoroughgoing traditional English kind of education. And then in 1970, well, it's a complicated story, but my family moved when I was 15 to New Zealand with my 3 younger siblings and left me behind, which I was not well pleased at. I came out in 73 for my 6-month sort of gap year, came out on a boat with a friend, and I had the classic thing, first day of drawing the curtains back at the farm where I joined my parents just down the road. On February the 12th, 1973, I remember the date, it was my mother's birthday. And I opened the curtains and I had this incredible rush feeling, this blue sky, this crazy steep escarpment in front of me, sort of parched landscape. But the sort of psychic emptiness of the place. There was no, in England where I've been educated, there was that sense of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years and thousands of people's lives going before you, and you were sort of swamped in this sort of somewhat psychic morass, I suppose, if I was going to be colourful. And New Zealand had a sort of cleanliness, openness, possibilities of doing things differently, which I just completely fell for. My time at Oxford was happy enough that the best thing that happened there was meeting my wife. And amazingly, in 1977, she came out and joined me. And we got married in 77, and we moved to Cable Bay. And that little place with a sort of bunch of trees, which many of you will know, became our home. It was called rather Tui Cottage. And when we first moved in, it was like an oasis in a little bit of a desert, what I call a pastoral desert, because the sheep had either chewed it to 1 inch high everything, or the farmer sprayed it or burnt it. And it was a pretty bleak sort of landscape actually, but it still had its great beauties, and the bush-clad hills up in the background. But anyway, we moved there, had 1 son already, and another son was born 6 months after we moved in, at home. It was just me and the midwife. Those were the hippie days. Just me and the midwife. And then in 1983, our 3rd son was born there, and so the little family grew. In the meantime, I'd been doing a bit of. That's just another nice view of it, looking from the hill down to the estuary with Bishop's Peninsula in the middle of the background, and Delaware Bay and the Waka Waka River sweeping round and out through the cut of Delaware Bay. So one end is Cable Bay, one end is Delaware Bay. So that estuary is what it amounts to. I went back to England for 6 months in 1980 and trained with a furniture restorer, an antique furniture restorer, because that was the sort of limit of my feeling for what I could do as a maker. I'd worked with a hippie builder a little bit, and he was great, but I found that history was still dominating my mind, and the idea of restoring old pieces was very appealing. And I managed to find work for 6 months and came back with a trunk full of polishes and glue and inlays and brass bits and bobs and things that you might need, and set up in business in Nelson as a restorer. And I found in no time I had masses of work on it. It wasn't short of work at all. But by, another nice picture of Gurgle Bay, by 1983, 84, I started to get a bit sick of it. I just found another Victorian mahogany dresser with a bit of veneer chipped off the edge and needing repolishing. It was kind of depressing after a while, and I noticed that my heart rose when a simple Georgian chest without decoration, just plain but beautifully made. And I started, my design awareness was completely self-taught. I had nil design awareness, so it was completely off the seat of my pants. But I started realising that sort of these rather plain things were rather more attractive than the Victorian things. Having said which, the very first piece of furniture I made, which of course was a local friend who was also having babies at the same time as us, and he wanted a high chair. So he said, could I make a high chair? I had no idea how to make a high chair, but I found that I could figure out geometry and angles, and that was the very first chair I ever made. A little Victorian, it was Gothic, talk about product of my upbringing, Victorian Gothic looking high chair in Elmwood. And I just found that having made one chair, that excitement and thrill of making the chair compared to repolishing a broken down antique there was no comparison. So I started slowly easing my way into sort of making, and I got a few orders, and then in 1984, it was a very, very amazing time. Jim Krenoff, who some of you might have heard of, Alan Peters in England, who you probably might not have heard of, but he was very big in his day, Richard Latrobe Bateman, who was an English designer, and a beautifully named American craftsman called Art Carpenter. His full name was Arturo Espinet Carpenter, but Art Carpenter suited him quite great. He was a kind of hippie builder, and he was the antidote, I won't say that advisedly, for Krenoff, for whom sandpaper was a kind of dirty word, and hand planing, hand finishing, everything was sort of done up by hand. Art Carpenter's, one of his photos was him with a belt sander in each hand, going up and down the table. So I realised quite early that there was more than one way of doing woodwork. And in 1984, a group of young guys, very similar to myself, who was set up in business, trying to make a go of it, decided to have a crack at putting on an exhibition in Christchurch, and they called it the Alternative Furniture Show, as it was put on at the same time as the Canterbury Furniture Manufacturer Federation's show, which in 1984 was probably the most boring furniture you have ever seen anywhere. It was really grim. It was the era of stuck-on veneer chipboard and everything sort of done on sort of the crudest kind of shaping, and it was awful. So we called ourselves the Alternative Furniture Show, about a dozen of us. We rented our space, we rented a hall, we invited a speaker, we had a bit of wine and cheese, and opened the doors, and people poured in. And in the meantime, I built my first rocking chair, completely off my own bat. I had sort of no idea what I was doing, except that 2 rocking chairs had come into my workshop, one of which was an English and one was American, both traditional. Neither of them had any sort of balance or comfort. I was surprised when I sat in one tried to kick me out, and one sort of grabbed me and tipped me back. And I thought, well, the balance is wrong on both of these. The comfort wasn't great, so I decided I could make a chair better than any of that. So I made this chair, massive amount of work, and struggled because I wasn't a chair maker and I had no idea really what I was doing to put it together. But I came to the show with this rocking chair, and one of these incredible things happened. The lady who was the MP for Yoldhurst, Margaret Austin. She, some of you might remember, she was a lovely person. She opened the show. Okay. She came round to the exhibits one by one. Very nice, very nice. She came to mine and she said, "May I sit on your chair?" I said, "Please do." So she sat down on my chair, and then she got up. She pulled out a checkbook and said, "And how much do you want for it?" And it was the first piece to sell in the whole show, and all the other guys hated me instantly, as you can imagine. But it was like a message from on high. Providence had put out its hand and patted me on the head and said, "Well done, thou good and true servant. Thou art going to be a furniture maker." So I really went from there. That was the start, and I was part of that group for 12 years. That was about its lifespan. It ran for about 12 years. We had it in Dunedin and Wellington. But that chair, after about 3 iterations, turned into that. I sort of tidied it up, smartened it up, got the angles better. But by 1989, I'd made about a dozen of these. They'd become quite a hit. But I was absolutely sick of them because there was so much waste of wood. There was no bending or laminating in any of this. It was all cut and shaped out of solid planks. Wow. So each rocker was a great lump of 6x2, and I just had to end up throwing away 90% of it. And I thought, no, I just found it too painful to keep sort of throwing away this walnut, which was hard to get hold of. So we went to Australia for, well, maybe I'll carry on actually through that early period. In 1987, a big change happened. I built my own workshop at home. I managed to borrow $20,000 at a time when interest rates, you young guys that complain about interest rates, 21%. 21%. So I borrowed $20,000 and built my workshop, and life got so much better because I'd been going in on a little scooter into Nelson every day from Cable Bay back to my workshop, back. So that was fantastic. And I got some lovely commissions. This was my best man in England who'd taken a different path. We studied history together at Magdalen College. He took a different path than me and was able to afford my furniture as a result. London School of Business or something, and he ordered a desk, and so that was the first big piece of furniture I built. And then some other friends bought this elm table, which again was a sort of an early, slightly crude attempt to do a sort of arty piece, I suppose you might say. That elm top was actually all carved with a little half-round chisel sculptured. You can't see it in the picture, but believe me, it's there. I made a few corner cabinets and enjoyed the graphic element that you got from a corner cabinet, because you got a perspective centre line from which ribs could sort of flow out and then meet the curves coming in. That was an interesting exercise because the door, which you can't really tell here, but the door was curved, so the glass had to be curved. So I had to make this piece backwards. The normal process when you're building a cabinet, which many of you will know, is you build the cabinet, then you build the doors to fit the cabinet, and then you put the panels in to fit the doors to fit the cabinet. This was the opposite, the exact opposite. So I got the glass. I was so scared about getting the shape wrong that I then built the door, which had a curve in it, and make sure it accepted the glass and fitted. And once it all fitted up, then I made the cabinet to fit the door, to fit the glass. So that was the way around it went. That was a matai, which was a timber I was really enjoying, with sycamore and walnut inlay or something like that. A huge part of unfolded for me, a huge part of my career was just getting wood. I just found that process was possibly the most enjoyable of the whole lot, actually. Going out, finding trees, like this wasn't a particularly big tree, but look at the colour of the heartwood. That was a walnut tree, probably 120 years old, hadn't grown particularly big, growing out in the Clark Valley, a very sort of rugged area, but just the most stunning colour. And chasing walnut logs, I've been doing it for 40 years. I don't know how many trees I've had milled. I usually try to get them when, in fact, I've never asked for a walnut tree. Gone to a farm, said, I like the look of that tree, can I have it? I always waited till I'd heard the tree was cut, or someone was going to cut the tree down. This one was leaning right over his garage, so he wanted it cut down. I just loved that process of opening up a log. I mean, it's like a treasure chest. It really is. You open the log, you don't know what's inside. You peel off the first plank, and with something like walnut, the colours are so spectacular. In fact, they're never better. Unfortunately, the colours fade from then on a little bit. But so I would then stack up my wood, leave it a couple of years air drying, and I spent hours on my skill saw just ripping up planks and trying to find sort of good, interesting patterns. That's a sort of book match pattern, and I'd I planned to make a seat of a rocking chair out of one, and other bits and pieces. So you can, with highly figured wood, you've got to work around all the figure and the knots and the shape and the character, and come up with something that works. You can't just treat it like a piece of plain birch or a piece of white ash or a piece of white oak. You've got to look at it quite differently. You've got to follow what's there, make best use of it as best you can. And that was a rare piece for me. I avoided live edged pieces in the main. This slab was so pretty though that I was about to cut off the branchy bit and just have the little straight grain bit in the middle because it was just easier to use. And I suddenly thought, because there were splits right where those wedges are, the timber had dried, and I thought I can use that split to cut another wedge, insert a leg, and turn it into a coffee table without losing anything of the plank. Plus I found, there's a tip for you, if you mill a walnut tree in winter, the bark will stay on. If you mill it in summer, the bark falls off. So this one I obviously milled in winter. And
David, in the summer, did the bark fall off after you made that table?
no, I never heard from the people. It was sold in Christchurch in a furniture show, and I never heard back that it fell off. And generally, if it's held on until it's seasoned, it'll hold on. It usually cracks and splits and peels off earlier if it's going to do it. Good point. I enjoyed cabinets, but again, you can see my dominant interest in a way was using the shape of the wood, the grain of the wood, to make interesting patterns, and then building a piece that sort of contained those patterns. So that was one version, a wine cabinet. This was what was called an armour. It's quite a lot bigger. Went to a couple in Singapore who bought quite a bit of stuff from me. But again, that sort of strong, gutsy pattern in wood was a very appealing aspect of woodwork. And this went to Tokyo, to an American, and he wanted someone to store his shoes in the front entranceway of his home, and it was called a getabako. And so that was the sort of thing. The first 10 years I started making, and then I went to Australia for a year and helped a friend build a stone house. And I did no woodwork the entire year. This was 1989, after the share crash, and money was tight. Orders had sort of dried up, so we moved the family over and lived in a little tiny house off grid, and helped a friend build a huge limestone house. So I became a stonemason, which I wasn't very good at. When I see what block layers can do and what I was doing, it was ridiculous. But he decided that he wanted his friends to build this house for him. He was a wealthy enough guy to indulge that fantasy. And while I was there, I took the opportunity to learn about steam bending, read up everything I could about steam bending, because I had in my head a new rocking chair design. I was sick of making the old one. I thought, this is my opportunity. I can make something better. I wanted a rocking chair which expressed, if you like, the Platonic idea of a rocking chair, which is not a chair stuck on rockers, but a chair that expresses in every aspect of it a sort of softness, a motion, a comfort, an ease, a kind of rhythm. And I came up with my rocking chair, which in a way I sort of jumped ahead of myself by about 10 years with that chair. It took me about 10 years to really make anything else that even approached it in interest. And I was starting to get a bit worried, actually, because the rocking chair I refined quite quickly. I went through the stages of refinement, and they were flying out in the 90s. I was selling 10 or 15 a year, and they were all hand-shaped and hand-worked. And I started employing a couple of guys part-time to help me out with them, and they were great. But it became almost like a sort of a bit of a trap for me, because I was nothing else. People would say, "Well, when are you going to make your next rocking chair, Dave, or design?" I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Have I got it in me?" I started to worry a bit. But it kept the money on the table, and at that stage the boys were teenagers, and you know, every month you had to find $6,000 or $7,000 had to come in every month. There was no holiday pay. There was no backstop of cash to help you out. You just had to bring it in. So I just worked all the time. It didn't worry me back then. It does now. It didn't worry me back then. I had all the enthusiasm. Well, I couldn't wait to get in the shop, and I had to be dragged out of the shop at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. Claire would go, "Come on!" One of the boys would run there. "Come on, Dad, supper's on the table. Just one moment, just one moment." But anyway, it's been. I've made probably nearly 300, and that's kind of just about enough. I may have one or two more left, but I'm never going to go back to those days. I haven't got the energy, but anyway, it turned out to be the chair that, because of its photogenic possibilities and qualities, every magazine, every time I got contacted for a group of furniture makers and they want a shot, I'd find that this rocking chair was often on the front cover of the whole publication, or on the, you know, take up a whole page in an editorial or something. And so it really put me on the map in a way.
It still is.
and it's a piece I still enjoy looking at. And that to me says a lot. I'm not sick of it at all. And I suppose you could say like a violin or a cello. You know, it's got a timeless sort of quality, and it's a beautiful thing to have, and that probably won't change. But in the meantime, I kept on with much more prosaic things, which I also enjoyed. This little bar stool with an elm seat and oak legs, and I made a great number of chests. This was cherry wood and sycamore. And then in 2002, I got invited to go to America to teach at a wood school in America. A crazy series of coincidences that got me there. But basically, a very famous American woodworker visited me in New Zealand in 2000, and invited me, as Americans do, "If you're ever in the States, my boy, come and visit me." And it turned out to be Thomas Moser. And Tom Moser was a sort of iconic furniture maker of Maine at the time. And I didn't really realise how big he was until we got to Maine, because the following year we did a big trip, our first trip for 20 years. My first trip back to England for 20 years, actually. We went to stay with Thomas, and about day 3 there, he said, "Come on down to," excuse my accent, I can't resist it. "I want you to come and visit. There's an old friend of mine, Peter Corn, and he's this young guy like yourself. He's just started a wood school in Maine called the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship. I'm on the board, you know, and all that. Come and have some, you know." So anyway, we drove. It was only an hour and a half drive away. We drove up to Camden and met Peter Corn, who was this young, bustling guy. I was very impressed. And he got this beautiful little wood school, which incidentally was about the size this is now. And that's what he was like 25 years ago. But he had big plans. Peter Corn was one of these guys that maxes things. He just can't help himself. But anyway, at that stage, he just had the one workshop and a secretary and him and his students. And we had a nice talk. We had lunch. I went back home, and I didn't honestly think any more of it. And then when we got back from that trip, back to New Zealand, waiting for me virtually, but it was an email, so it wasn't quite. It was an offer to go and teach at his school the next year, which completely flabbergasted me, because that was the last thing I had been thinking about. I hadn't even crossed my mind. And then the next thing was, he put a picture of my rocking chair on their newsletter, the thing that went out to all his students, which was a bit of a shock too. But anyway, going there opened up my opportunities and mind. Remember, this was pre-internet days, so you had to actually meet people or read a book to get some new ideas and inspiration. So going to America then, I started to meet, Garrett Hack and Michael Fortune and Silas Kopp, all these names that I'd read about in Fine Woodworker. Suddenly they were there, right next to me. I was teaching with them or alongside them. It was like completely blew my mind, really. There was you can see that dazed look on my face with Michael Fortune on one side and a guy called Owen Edwards, who I taught a 12-week class with. He was a Krenoff disciple. We had, in 1980, in 2004, I was invited back. In fact, I've been invited back every 2 years ever since, basically. And Claire came with me, and we just explored coastal Maine, which is beautiful. We always went in the summer months. That was along the road just outside the school. This was Camden Harbour, beautiful little coastal town full of the most gorgeous little New England buildings, library and churches and spires and everything. And we walked up Mount Katahdin. Well, I say walked up, we struggled up Mount Katahdin, which is the last stop on the Appalachian Trail. And I only realised that on my way down. And I suddenly remembered Bill Bryson's book, if you ever read it, A Short Walk in the Woods, or A Walk in the Woods. And I remembered as we were going down these boulders, vast boulders the size of this room, with metal spikes in them, so you should get up and over and down the other side because it's on a ridge. And I suddenly remembered, my God, this is the description that Bill Bryson gave of the last down the Appalachian Trail. And indeed it was. Anyway, I nutted out a system while I was in the States for making wide curved tapering panels, which was something I'd been meaning to do for years, but I had not figured out a good way to do it. I could have just got a bunch of steam bent pieces, stacked them up like a butcher's block, or not a butcher's block, but just laminated them and then shaped them all afterwards. But I thought there's got to be a cleaner way to do it than that. And Michael Fortune, one of his little demos, gave me a little clue, but he was using MDF, but I suddenly thought, I don't need to use MDF for a curved interior, I can use solid wood. And then because I was confident with steam bending by then, because I'd steam bent all those rocking chair bits, I could make an edging strip that followed the curves that looked like, so that you didn't have that sort of horrible look of an apply bit of short grain. You know, you've got a curve, you apply a bit of wood to it, and then you've got short grain here, and then long grain here and short grain here, and it looks very ugly. This way I could get the curving strip, as long as I cut it from the right bit of the board matching, I could get it to match the side panels. And that sent me off into a little, I made this table I called my Andromeda table. If you've ever seen, actually most galaxies in the universe I think are basically that shape, spirals. I made this. I made probably 6 or 7 of these coffee tables. Michael Fortune trick was to inlay pure silver into wood, which I did on this one, and it was interesting with the glass top. The silver into the wood mediated between the shiny glass and the wood as a kind of connection. I sometimes think, sorry guys, but I sometimes think that just glass on the table it's a bit sort of abrupt, and something that sort of bleeds into it is nice. So I call that my Andromeda, and then some years later I made a table, kind of similar idea, but these two curves just kind of kissed each other lightly, and went on, and I call that my Pisces table, because Pisces is my birth sign as it happens, and there's 2 fish swimming in opposite directions, which often seems to happen in my life. And then another version which we have at home. I love this table. I just call it my dolphin table. The caricature, and just brought the edges, but using that same technique to a very fine point. And then I started making desks which had ends, which used this system. This was a Wellington client, maple and walnut, again, just using that same technique. What it amounted to was I could use this panel system, which was basically a made-up panel, but with solid wood, but all kind of veneered over the top and edged. But I could use it in conjunction with solid wood, because basically it was solid wood. It wasn't MDF, and so the core could move as well as the outside, and we did. This was a kind of nutty project. That's a Swiss railway clock, and I had this couple who ended up buying a huge amount of furniture from me over the years, and he would come up with funny projects. So he had a clock, and I was going to make something like a grandfather clock, but contemporaryized. And my son, who was a far more acute artist than I am, to be honest. He came round for morning tea one day and looked at my drawing of what I was going to make, and he just said, "That is so boring." Thanks, Nick. So, which is sometimes what you need. So I freed myself up and just did some silly sketches and came up with this. So it's nothing special, but it was actually a ridiculous amount of work. Each of those panels had a different former for the steam bending edge and the shape. So 3 enormous gluing up panels to make the shape. For one piece, it was kind of out of kilter. And I think we've all got to watch that as furniture makers, that we don't make things that require so many jigs, and then you say, "Oh, we're going to be one piece." That's kind of not really. I mean, it's nice if you can use shapes again. I've got kind of a universal heavy form about this long, which has got basically a parabolic curve. It's about that wide, and what that means is I can pick a bit of curve out that I want, and because it's parabolic, it's got a lot of motion in it, and I'll just use a bit from here to here and just get a curve like that, or a bit from here to here where it's flatter, just a little bit like that. And that way, one form, which probably took me 2 days to build, I can use again and again and again, and without making exactly the same piece. This table I called Sally's table, out of matai, which was hard to steam. Those edge strips were hard to steam bend. Matai is not a good steam bending wood, but I love the effect of it. And that picture actually got into the only one I've ever had, actually. It was 500 boxes, This was in 500 tables. So there was a Nelson group of furniture makers, with John Shaw teaching at the Polytech for all those years. There was actually quite a cabal of Nelson makers in the early 2000s who got together, and we did a little bit like this alternative furniture show, but local, and we had about 4 or 5 shows and maybe a dozen different makers in each, and I came up with this design. I'm not quite sure why I came up with it now, but anyway, it was a chair that I call it my V chair. And I just liked it. And then an architect who bought a rocking chair off me from Ireland, a lovely guy, he said he had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and he wanted 2 pieces of mine to give to them when he died. And he had the rocking chair, so he said, what I'd really like is a desk. And he said, and I like the chair you've already made. You can see the picture of the V chair. So I designed the desk, and the V chair just went with it beautifully. And that picture was actually on the back cover of a very good American furniture making magazine about 20 years ago. And a surprising number of people have remembered my name when they saw that, or that sort of association. That desk was probably one of the most satisfying all-round pieces I've ever made, actually. It sort of had a bit of everything. The construction was difficult for me. I'm not. There are many. I should say this quite honestly, without false modesty, but there are many way better woodworking furniture makers than me. There just are. There are some brilliant makers. I struggle. I didn't come to this naturally. I was an academic type of person. My brain has had to work this out. So I struggled with it, but it was an incredibly satisfying piece to make. And with the chair as well, I thought that the blend was just, sorry, blowing my own trumpet there, but it was one of my favourite pieces. I made one more for a guy in London about 5 years later, which was almost as nice. And then this you'll have seen. This was, the school started in 2007, and I designed this as a piece to teach steam bending, and but it also involved that curve bending technique, that wide curving panel technique for the seat, and eventually the little understretches became a laminating technique. So we had steam bending, laminating, curve bending, plus a curve bend and a recurve steam bend, which is the edging strip of the seat. That was actually made by a student here about 2-3 years ago, I really liked it. He blackened. You've done it too, Rob, haven't you? You blackened the seat, and it's just rather effective. But I had one guy buy one of these once, and then he said, "I'd like a bedside which is odd, a bedside table to match." And so I thought, well, you usually have two, but anyway, I make one. So I made my R2D2, which was actually a lot of fun to make. Interestingly, that rippled ash, which is at the hoops of the legs, I'd never tried steam bending rippled wood. It's I thought it would break the rules for steam bending. But in fact, if the underlying grain was continuous, the ripples in fact made it easier to bend, oddly. So I was able to steam bend this highly rippled but straight grain ash. You know, the ripple is the grain can be doing this, and the ripple is in a it's just like the straight grain that's been concertinaed, which is exactly what happens in steam bending, in fact. So it's not surprising, but anyway, it was nice that it worked. That was to hold shoes. Well, everyone has their own. This was this couple that bought the clock and bought tables and chairs and chests. In fact, I think I had a piece. They had a piece from me every year for 21 years. They live in Dunedin. And then later on, she wanted the sort of matching piece to hold her linen. And this was a linen press. And those doors, which not drawers, they are doors. They opened out, and inside was a kind of open-sided shelf, like a drawer, but open, but cutaway sides for linen. And I also made the dining table and their sideboard.
Excuse me. Australia calling.
It's a commission. So they had a huge house, and so I could keep filling it. Most of the time, I found customers would have 4 or 5 pieces, and that was about it. You know, you rarely got someone who wanted 10 pieces, but these people have just gone on and on, partly because they keep on building, buying the section next door, making an even bigger new bit of the house, and so it goes on. This was a fun project. I got a drawing sent just by fax or whatever, no, it was email, of a circular bench to go around a tree for what do they call them?
Flower show.
For the flower show. For what do they call them? Landscape gardener. A landscape gardener. So I just like the look of it. The idea of a bench around a tree facing inwards. I'd seen lots of benches facing outwards around trees, but that's rather unfriendly when you think about it. When you're sitting next to someone and they're kind of disappearing around the corner. Whereas this had a very inclusive feel. So I put in a bid and I got the bid. And a German guy came over from the States and helped me with it for 3 months. And we built this thing out of redwood uprights and dividers, oak bent slats, and finally red beech seating slats and back. So all very durable timbers. And I wanted something which was going to be naturally durable and last for not just 10 years, but maybe 30 years or 40 years maybe. I even fitted bottom panels on the bottom of the cedar in contact with the ground of totara that I'd soaked in Metal-X to make sure to try to keep the rot out of the end grain. And it's now around a tree. If you're ever in Christchurch at the, where's it, lovely?
It's in front of the cafe in botanical gardens.
Front of the cafe. So there's a beech tree. Unfortunately, they put it for the show around a beautiful gnarled old linden tree. Was it a lime? No, it was plane, London plane. And they filled behind it with 600 potted tree ferns, and then filled it all up around it. So you went down this alleyway to get to this, and it felt truly magical. And everyone, people were queuing up to sit in it, and just sitting in there, because the only people you couldn't see were right on the other side of the tree. Everyone else you could see, and the person next to you could easily talk to. And I really got the feeling that this is what the UN needed. You know, if you wanted peace to break out in the world, a few of these around the tree, and it would help. So that was a fun, completely one-off project. But I visited every time I'm there, and it's aging pretty well. Red beech is very durable. California redwood is durable, and oak is durable. So if you pick the right woods, you can get away without having to use treated pine, or these exotic tropical hardwoods stained with the blood of orangutans, and such like. Which are sorry, guys. This was another rather fun commission to make a hat stand for a friend in Christchurch. And I did this with Michael Fortune during a residency. I found it incredibly difficult. Doing asymmetric is much harder than doing symmetric, especially if you're going to joint things on. So this stem, these branches fitted on into little scooped away sort of mortises. And yeah, I just found it really, really difficult and time consuming, but it was a lot of fun to make. And then the same lady that ordered the linen press and the shoe cabinet and the dining table chairs wanted a jewellery box. So I came up with a jewellery box for her. And this had a Hawaiian koa lid, which was rather spectacular, and rosewood panels. I got a little bit of rosewood off a friend. This was proper Brazilian rosewood. Lined it with, it's basically a glorified what Lou does, but the lid was really spectacular. And because it was curved, it made the veneering difficult. But I love the sunburst look of it. It had a sort of vaguely Aztec look to me, so I thought of that Temple of the Sun and the Aztecs. That's the way they slightly candled all their buildings in. This actually won a prize at the in an Australian woodwork magazine. They have a prize every year, and they have categories: boxes, chairs, and this won the box prize, which was very useful. And then a lady in Perth ordered this jewellery box, and she had quite a collection of jewellery. She must have by the specifications. But she insisted that I make the box out of mottled, what do they call it? Not swamp cowrie, but the stuff that's been around for 40,000 years and dug up out of the bogs, Northland. And so I found a piece and had a lot of fun trying to cut the pieces I wanted out to get the most spectacular grain I possibly could. An absolute thing to work as a woodworker because it was so brittle and the grain went every which way. So you ran a block plane, even razor sharp, and a bit would fall off the edge. So it was quite a job to make it. But to me, that was just it was a dragon's flame coming out that piece. It was just staggering, actually. Anyway. That was a use. You'll see I've used it a little bit. Using tapers in both directions on a cabinet to give it not just one direction, but in both directions to give it a sort of stance. And to me, furniture is all about stance. It's like, you can stand like that, and it sort of conveys one thing, or you can stand like that, and it conveys another. The furniture is exactly the same. It's a stance. It's anthropomorphic sort of feeling about it. Sorry, not with the box, it's a little hard to see it. But then came lockdown, and I call these the lockdown cabinets. The same guy that I made the hat stand for actually ordered these. And this was from cherry that he milled from his own place in Christchurch. A beautiful little cherry tree, English cherry, wild cherry. And it had the most beautiful colour and figure. And I managed to, he milled it and seasoned it for 2 years actually. It was a long-term project. And I made this little cabinet with a curvy drawer, which for you guys is now nothing. You can do far more complex, but for me this was quite complex. Yes. And then the leaf back chair, which is possibly my favourite of all the things I've made, I think. It sort of came to me in like many things, over a number of years, I moulded over. I tried a leaf on my rocking chair leaf back and really liked the leaf, but did not like the way it went with the chair. Then I made my V chair, which had a single back spine, but then split into two. And I took my time, but one day I just suddenly thought, well, I know I can make a chair three-legged with a single backed spine. Why not turn that spine into a leaf? So I drew it quite quickly, and it was one of these sort of lovely moments. You know, I'm not very good at sketching, but I sketched something out, and the lines I could see without straight away, just like with the rocking chair when I drew the lines of that. I thought that's good. That's something to work for. So I entered this chair into actually physically entered it into a competition in Canberra about 5, 6, 7 years ago. I can't remember that. 7 years ago, and it got the top prize. 10,000 smackaroonies, which was great.
And you still had the chair.
And I still had the chair. And you never guess who ended up buying it? Those customers in Dunedin. I just sort of waved the catalogue in front of them, and they said, "Yep, we'll have it." That was great. Interestingly, didn't sell in Australia. I think I think art in its own place is a very strong concept. People like to buy things from where they know. It's all very well exotic, but in fact people like to have something sort of with local connotations. So we're getting up very near the end now. This was a huge dining table job I made. It was 3.4 metres long, with 2 enormous leaves and a winding mechanism. Not great shots of it because I was just at the. It has one more leaf to go, so I made 12 V chairs for it. That was a huge commission for a single shop. That is a massive commission. But it was all my own cut veneers from a tree that I brought out from America, black walnut tree, log actually, and sliced up and seasoned myself over many years. And then 3 or 4 years ago I went to Maine and was given the honour of an artist in residence. And I made this various things, but I decided I'd plug away at this bench. In fact, it took me 2 sessions, as it were, to make it. My idea was very simple. I thought, what about a log on a beach? Is it comfortable? You see a log on a beach, you sit on it. So I thought, well, I could do that, but not just make it. I didn't want to just get a solid log and sculpt it. It wasn't my thing, really. So I steam bent all of these ribs and linked them together with little 5mm brass pins, epoxy together, so not a continuous join. Lining them all up was a pain. Making each rib tapered at the top to the bottom. That was my one and only venture into CNC, because the guy could run I could prop it where I needed the higher cut, and we just ran a program, and that little round cutter just went round and did it, and it was magic actually. This was just another little side table I made quite recently out of wenge and black walnut. It's kind of as light a structure as you can get away with. As some of you guys making tables are fine, and the tables can be a bit wobbly. This one was a bit wobbly, but it wasn't too bad. And then the latest piece I made was a complete and utter, well, not quite, just remember what I said about the jewellery box. Notice the legs on the jewellery box, these tapered pillars, very simple tapered pillars. So I don't know why I made them. It was one of these things that I've been drawing benches with curved legs and Windsor type and everything, and then suddenly, for some reason, I drew that, and I don't know why. The top had a curve in actually all directions. It was slightly curved in this way, like flat, slightly shaped out. Yeah, in 2 directions, and just linked. So basically, the seat also was curved, just scooped, and not in plan view, not straight, it was curved as well. So basically all the horizontals were slightly curved and all the verticals were tapers. And the really extraordinary thing was I put this on my Instagram page, which has been quite successful. And normally, in a really good post, I might get 7,000 views or 8,000 views, and maybe, if I'm lucky, maybe 1,000 likes. I mean, that was pretty spectacular. This one completely blew everything out of the water, and I have no idea why. Got 162,000 likes, views, and 8,000 likes, which is like 20 times more than even a good average. And I don't know why.
Prairie school modified.
Something like that. Yes, just obviously caught something, which sometimes it does. I mean, my rocking chair did that. It caught in the lessons, and this thing did the same. So this has gone to a local couple. The red oak. It was all made from, was milled off his own property 5 years ago, and it was quarter sawn and seasoned by a local miller, Justin Wells, and. So I was able to use, and it's gone into his house, which is where the tree grew. So that's a rather nice bit of it. And then, last one, I made this portal with, alongside Yuri Kobayashi, who came out and did the residency this last year, well, actually last January and February. If those of you who had the privilege of meeting Yuri, she's a Japanese-American woodworker. She's astounding person, and we had a lot of fun and sort of torment as well making this piece. She did the top, the incredible swirling interlaced sort of snakes that tied all together, and I did the kind of more humdrum sort of pillars encasing rocks. I mean, it was a silly idea really, but it was kind of fun to do as well. Anyway, that is, and then in the background there, it is, I say, the making of David Haig. Well, one person's made me, it's my dear wife. She not just made me, she's nurtured me and looked after me and kept me on the money. More than I can ever repay. So that's my lot. If anyone has any burning questions, very welcome. Otherwise, we'll go and have a cup of tea.
Or juice.
Or juice.
Juice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you put the picture of the portal back so I can come take a look at it closer?
Sure.
Who did you play?
Yeah. That was the thing about Yuri was she turned up and we were due to do a joint something. We didn't know what it was going to be, and we literally had no idea what it was going to be. But over the months before she came, I just thought, I don't want to just make a pure sculpture, because Yuri can do that. She's such a sculptress. I want to make something with a little practicality in it, something that's sort of not like a piece of furniture exactly, but has at least an architectural quality, so that it can be sort of, it's for something. So when she came, I just said, well, how about we just make we didn't know what to call it. Claire came up with the word portal. We didn't know what to call it, we just called it archway. Shall we make an archway? And I'll do the sides and you do the top. And to my amazement, I sketched something in 2 minutes, just to sort of, how about that? And I sort of did that sort of swirly thing on the top. Blow me down, she just honed in and just got what I sort of, far better than I could ever conceive. She just got it and made it. And then she made the most beautiful first sample. We've got one somewhere. It's hanging up, which I loved. But she looked at it and said, "Oh, I hate it." I said, "What's wrong with it? It just looks like fried almonds." She said, "Well, what's wrong with that?" No, she didn't want it. So she spent another 3 weeks trying different things until she came up with this crazy thing where the one bit would link under and then do double twist to get to the next one. So she got this really complex interlinking pattern, which was amazing to behold. Yeah. If you ever get a chance, Yuri, we hope will come back if you get the chance, even just to meet her or go to a slideshow. Her slideshow is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering about the backrest and volume. Like, how did you ended up like getting those measurements for the curb to fit so well on the back?
There was, right at the very, very beginning, of the very first rocking chair I ever made, I looked in Fine Woodworking magazine, and there was an article on aircraft chairs, how they make them comfortable. And they did a very, very simple little graph of the profile of a back that was comfortable, because it incorporated the lumbar spine region. And it's a recurve that goes in and then holds the shoulder blades and then comes out a little bit for the neck. All I did was copy that and put it into my chair so that that was the shape I had for all the back curves. And every single chair I've ever made has used exactly that principle. So it's not difficult. It's not difficult. The difficult thing is just deciding, if you've got a back here, at what angle you're going to place the seat. And a lot of that depends on what type of chair it is. If it's a lounging chair, you're going to be back like this. If it's a dining chair, you'll be more upright, or something in between for an office chair. But it's not rocket science. It is science, but it's not rocket science.
Do you build that for the average back? Because
well, there's
It feels comfortable because like we all tried it. We were like visiting and
I've realised over the years is that comfort in chairs is quite universal, oddly, whether you're tall or you're short. And the reason is, if you imagine it, if you imagine people, they don't grow from the bottom up, they grow from the middle out. Say that way. So basically what it amounts to is that people's, from the middle of the back of your thigh to the top of your lumbar, most people are not that different. If you're tall, it's because your back goes on a whole lot longer, or your legs go on a whole lot longer down at the bottom. But that sort of internal central shape is quite universal. So unless you get someone really, really unusual, you can more or less nail it with that formula. And then it's just that whether their neck and their head stick up above it or a bit below it, whether their feet touch the ground or not.
Not me too, Chris.
So it's interesting because I've had people say, "Oh, can you make a rocking chair for my shape and size?" And I say, "No." It's actually, you think about it, to change that rocking chair. If I had to change, because I have changed one thing, and then there's a ripple, you've got to change every damn thing. And then all your jigs and all your patterns change just by a degree or two, but enough to make it, you need new ones. So once I've found something that works, I stick to it like grim death.
thank you.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, David.